We moved to the country on 50 acres in 2019. How do I know that was worth it? Here's how I know. My kids have room to grow. They have room to run. They have a shop to work in. They have land to run on, play on, work on their animals. Build tree houses. Gives them something to do, more productive than video games. If you ask most people where the best place on earth is, most people I think will tell you where they're from, where they grew up. Well, I grew up in a few different places, and I've lived in a few different places as an adult. I've got a few places to compare to this place I live now, and given the choice, I would live here rather than any of those other places. Let me tell you why. We all want the best experience for our kids, the best future. We want to offer the best things we can for our children. That's one of the reasons we moved here. We wanted our kids to have room to run, room to grow. We came at a time where some of our kids, our oldest one was 14. We all want to provide the best life that we can for our children. And many of us would like our children to have a better life than we had. My parents and grandparents grew up on a farm. I didn't. I wanted to get back to it. So as an adult, I moved to a larger place with more land, somewhat of a small farm. So we're getting back to our roots, back to animals, nature, and manual labor for our children. Our children have farm chores, and they have room to do things that they want out in the country. We think that's best. One reason I'm recording this is to set the backstory for how we ended up here. And it goes in stages too. Like, there were many places that we lived when I was a young child that I don't even remember. We moved several times when I was really young. I don't remember much about those places. Some of the places we lived as a kid, I do remember a lot, and they were developmental times, and they really set the stage for a lot of my life. So I wanted that for my kids. I wanted to set the best stage. I wanted them to have the best young life that they could possibly have, and we picked this as the best option. There's a pattern in my adult life of places that I lived that were similar to what my parents did, which involved moving according to career goals and what were happening in my career. It's not that I don't have any career goals anymore. I do. But I've chosen to put down a little bit more of a route now. I've chosen to stay put so that my kids have more stability. The friends that they make in this area, they keep those friends for longer. And I think it's better for my kids' emotional, spiritual, and physical health. I hope you'll enjoy this history, and I hope you'll consider moving out to the country where the air is fresher, there's less noise. I think it's a better life. Come here, girl. Come on, girl. I'm checking my hay here. the dryness of it. Somebody taught us kind of this twist technique. I'm trying to learn that. We're gonna make some hay here. We don't have the latest and greatest equipment, but we're kind of experimenting with making our own hay to be a little more self-sufficient and not have to depend on other people to come over here and bale it for us. All right, you don't want that in your baler. Sticks are no good. It's for my wife and kids that we live here. Okay, that's why we moved to the country, for them. Of course, I had selfish reasons. I wanted to hunt and shoot. I've always wanted that forever, the freedom and the space to run and roam. Okay, I want the peace and quiet that only the woods and the country and fields can provide. Okay, you can get that in a park, but you're gonna hear traffic. Living out here offers my kids opportunities that they can't get in the city. Okay, I know there are trade-offs. We live further from the grocery and soccer leagues and social activities. You can't just walk across the street and go to those. You're gonna have to drive more when you live out in the country. That's just the way it goes. Okay, we do a homeschool co-op, so we're not just isolated out in the country by ourselves. We do homeschool, but we talk to people. We go to church. We have a cooperative at church and school with a bunch of other homeschool kids. Okay, I know they kind of think like me, like us. That's all right. We enjoy it. Our church is only 2 miles from here. We really like that. We like that convenience. That's hard to find. There's a tick. This is one of my blinds here, my turkey and deer blind. Works out well. Okay, the kids have room to run here, room to roam and play. They do tree houses and play around in the woods and make little bicycle paths. They have all sorts of fun out here. Now I have ants, quite a few ants all over me. This chair must be loaded with ants. It's been sitting out here a while. Some details are left out to protect the innocent or to protect the guilty, however you want to say it. Number 1, I was born in Hardinsburg, Kentucky, a small town with no stoplights in Kentucky. We lived with my grandmother because my dad was away with the Marine Reserves. It was Vietnam era time. He was in basic training and doing some work with the National Guard. My mother stayed at my grandmother's house out in the boonies on 130 acres in Rhodelia, Kentucky. Now I'm starting to get a little bit bigger. Number 5, Georgetown, Indiana. We lived in a small brick ranch at the end of the street. It was a quiet neighborhood. My parents owned that house. Real estate is something I'll talk about on this channel sometimes. Owning, if you're only there a couple of years, is basically renting your house from the bank. It's not a lot different. Be careful of that, young people. All right, we owned the house, okay, or at least agreed to pay the bank for it. I remember my dad filling a few potholes on the road to our house with a shovel and some gravel. I guess because the local authorities didn't get to it fast enough. I remember playing with a few of the local kids. I remember having some fun, but some of the kids were a little bigger. They could ride bicycles. That was impressive. I remember a few of the kids, maybe 5 to 8 years old, hiding under a deck at one of the houses in the neighborhood. and smoking a pipe or cigarettes. I think it was a pipe at the time. Of course, I'm sure they got it from their parents. But I didn't hang out with those kids much after that because I didn't think that was such a great idea. All right, I remember throwing rocks with my sister. She was 2 years younger, so she must have been really small. And she threw rocks once toward a neighbor's house, and she said, "Look how far I can throw it." And so I thought, well, I'll throw it further than she can. I'll try to throw it over the house. Well, I fell short. I hit the glass sliding door on the house, and the owner was very upset about that. I remember that. I didn't intend to do it, but I did. Also remember some of those same kids coming around the house one day. My dad was in the garage with the door open. The kids couldn't see him, but he could hear them. And they were being silly and kind of picking on me. I was a little bit younger than they. I remember my dad was pretty tall then, and he looked pretty tough. He was just out of boot camp at the time. And he came around the corner, pointed his finger, and said, "Get on home." Those kids disappeared, and I don't remember ever seeing them again. So that's one of my experiences living with other kids in a neighborhood when I was young. I kind of project that to my kids. I know, of course, there are life lessons you have to learn hanging out with kids in the neighborhood. And you can meet lifelong friends in the neighborhood. I understand that. But there are also other kids that you can't control, that you really don't want your kids associated with, but they're there. You can't control it. When they're little, I like to control it. When they're bigger, they can control themselves. I want control when they're 3 years old or 5 years old. Where did we go next? Hardinsburg, Kentucky for number 6. Back to the roots. Moving back to the homeland, Hardinsburg, Kentucky. Amazing place. All right, I remember a little house, little tall, white, 2-story wood siding house that we lived in. I remember quite a bit about that. I was maybe 5 years old at this time. I remember our neighbor sitting in his 2nd-story window at Halloween. With a microphone and a big speaker. He would speak down to the kids he could see coming up to the porch for their trick-or-treats. They were really surprised and didn't know where that sound was coming from. He would use a deep voice. Rah. There were so many kids that were scared. That was funny. The place was pancake flat. It had sidewalks and roads. We rode our big wheels, tricycles, bicycles. I learned to ride a bike there. I was so proud. I remember I had a big wheel, plastic front tires, plastic 2 rear tires, a little tricycle. A friend had a green machine. It was a similar setup, 2 plastic wheels in the back, plastic wheel in the front, but you steered it differently, kind of like a bulldozer. I remember we would race down the sidewalk, and if he got in front of me, I would use my front wheel to get into his rear wheels and cause him to steer. He would go off the sidewalk, just like a NASCAR driver. I would go right around. I used to really enjoy that. He didn't enjoy it so much. I remember a neighbor had a little bitty small bicycle, and I tried until I could ride that bicycle. I remember showing my uncle and my dad and my parents in the driveway that I could ride it. I could ride the bike. Number 7, McQuady, Kentucky. Okay, I remember a lot about this place. I was getting older, able to remember more. I was in early grade school. A farmer lived on the property next over from us. He had a daughter a couple years older than I. My sister and I used to play with his daughter. We'd play around on the farms, swim in the creek and in the pond, played Monopoly at the house, had homemade ice cream on the front porch in the summer. We picked blackberries. It was super hot, probably 100 degrees. We picked blackberries. It was fun times. The place was a rental. It was out in the country, but it was the first time we'd lived on any big piece of property. We used to see deer run across, and it was exciting. There was a creek there. We played in the creek. We had a garden there. My dad used to plow up the garden, and we found all sorts of flint arrowheads in the dirt. Some of them practically in pristine condition. They were amazing. We used to squirrel hunt there. My dad would take me squirrel hunting. I was so excited to go. He would make me stand, we would get to where the squirrels were. He would make me stand still, and he would go over and stalk the squirrel, shoot it with his .22, and bring it back. He was my hero. I really enjoyed those squirrel hunts. Now, there's not a lot of meat on a squirrel, but it was exciting still for a little kid. The house was a brick rancher. It was at the end of a long gravel driveway. To us, that gravel driveway when we were little kids seemed like probably a half mile long. If we went there today, I bet it was shorter, but to us it was very long. There was a big field out front that had soybeans or corn in it. It was a great wide open field. I remember my dad setting up his .22 and lobbing shots out there at groundhogs. And sometimes when he was determined to get that groundhog, he would whip out his .270 and launch shots out there for the groundhogs. He thought he was doing the farmer a favor by preventing damage to the soybeans. And it was fun for him and for me. Of course, my sister and I did a lot of playing out at Macy's, out in the boonies. On one particular occasion, my mother kicked us out of the house. We'd spilled a 2-liter Coke on the kitchen floor. We made lots of noise, and she had a baby in the house. She was at her wit's end. She kicked us out of the house. We went outside, and it was windy, a little bit cool. So at first, we sat by the house trying to get it warm, and then we thought, to heck with this, let's go down in the woods where it's not windy. We can play in the creek and have some fun. So we went down to the creek. We floated little plastic boats in the creek and sticks, and we would watch where they went in the creek and follow them and follow them. We lost track of time. We must have been out there for a couple of hours. We went further and further from the house. My mom couldn't find us. She was upset. She called the neighbors, called the aunts and uncles and friends. They came over and looked for us. My uncle found us down in the woods, perfectly happy and safe. When we got back to the house, though, things didn't go that great. We used to watch a show, Little House on the Prairie, and if something like that had happened on Little House, they would have gotten hugs, and the parents would have been so appreciative they were back safe at home. We got spankings for running away and not telling her where we went. That was a different reality. At this house number 7, we had a wood stove. It was a stove that my dad designed and built. He got a patent on it, and it was his first prototype. We actually burned it in the house, in the basement. We burned that stove. That's one of the first times I remember wood heat. I remember it at my uncle's and at my grandmother's and granddad's, but the first time we had it was there at this rental, number 7, out in McQuady. All right, keep in mind that when we lived near Hardinsburg, we also lived near where I was born. So we lived near my grandparents, so we would go visit them a lot, on the weekends especially. Now their farm was about 130 acres, and that's where my mother grew up with her 5 siblings. I think it was a 4-bed, 2-bath brick rancher, 3 ponds loaded with bluegill and bass. We used to fish in those farm ponds, catch bluegill after bluegill. It was exciting for little kids. We got to see hay production, cattle production, lots of wild blackberries in the fence rows to pick. We had a lot of good times. There's ping pong and pool in the basement, and a wood stove in the basement at my grandmother's. All right, number 8 when I was a kid was Ephasus Church Road, Harned, Kentucky. Small brick ranch with a basement, 5 acres, and my parents owned it. They weren't renting it this time. They agreed to pay the bank for it, owned it. And when we looked at that property with the realtors, my sister and I and my 2 younger siblings went to the creek and got filthy muddy, fell in the creek, got wet, covered with mud, moss. We went back to the house. My mother, though she was a little bit embarrassed, it convinced the sellers and the realtors. Yeah, coming back to that house from the creek all muddy, it showed the realtors and my parents that we really liked the place, and we wound up moving there. I'll consult my notes here a little bit more. Dad worked to finish the basement there. We had an extra bathroom installed in the basement. Dad did the work himself. He also put in a brick fireplace for our freestanding wood stove. That wood stove was yet another example of burning wood in the wintertime when I was a kid. And it's just that cozy, warm feeling. It feels like family. It feels comforting and relaxing. I still get that feeling today. If you know what one of these is and what it's used for, you're miles ahead of some people considering moving to the country. It's a T-post driver. T-post can be your friend. When I was 15, people thought I was crazy. I bought a four-wheeler instead of waiting a few months and buying a car like some of my other friends. I enjoyed that four-wheeler. It was a manual shift, so I learned to drive a clutch on that thing. I drove it across the creek. I got access to some other farms, a gravel road that went way back, and it was just lots of fun. Some friends and I used to ride in the snow. We'd get together, especially when it snowed, on a snow day from school, ride our four-wheelers. It was fun out there in the boonies. That creek behind our house at that 5-acre place had some small holes that were deeper than standard, and they had fish in them, little small minnows. But the thing about it was so fun to fish there because there was no pressure. The fish never saw any lures, so they bit everything. You threw it out there, bam, 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 at nonstop action. As a kid, that was a great place to fish. That cemented my love for the wide open spaces and rural living. We were there until I graduated from high school. Number 9, the Trent House. Okay, once again, my dad received word at work that he might be transferred somewhere else. So in order to be mobile, we went back to a rental in town in Hardinsburg, Kentucky. It was called the Trent House, or we called it the Trent House. They were the people who used to live there. They had updated the house and renovated it, had wood floors. It was a nice 2-story white siding house, pretty big house, but a very small yard, probably like a half-acre yard. By that time I was away in college, so I would just come back in the summer times, and I had a lifeguard job at a local pool and at the local state park pool and lake beach area. Of course, all this time we used to visit my Uncle Paul's place too, where we deer hunted every year for opening day of gun season. Paul owned 20 or 25 acres, and then he bought 40 more across the road. Then he inherited, essentially, or took over a family farm that his wife's family had. So then he got an extra 130 acres, I think. So that place was nice and rural. Of course, he had cattle, he raised hay, had a couple ponds for fishing. There again, it was great rural living. Okay, I wound up going away to college twice for 2 different degrees, 2 different times. And so there were a lot of transient housing, I guess you would say, dormitories and off-campus apartment housings that I did during college. I consider those places that I've lived, but they were pretty rapid succession, so I won't cover everything on those. So they'll go numbers 11, 12, and 13, rent some dorms. And then I transferred to a larger university, did some more dormitories, 14 and 15, 16, 17, off-campus rental. Then graduated the first time, went back to Brandenburg temporarily, then moved to Louisville. I had a job in Louisville, Kentucky. I moved there to a small little brick house. It was a rental. And then, number 20, moved to another rental near Seneca and Cherokee Park in Louisville. It was a nice place. It was with a guy who retired from NASA at Huntsville. He rented out rooms in his house to pilots who came into UPS there at the hub in Louisville, and also to just students. So it was a great setup. It was a great part of town. Of course, it was a pretty large town, Louisville, Kentucky. For me, it was fairly large. Of course, it was city living, mass transit, lots of concrete, a few parks, a little more crime, liberal thought process in general. So I didn't necessarily like it that great, but I was there. The good thing about living in the bigger city, of course, was the coffee shops. I got pretty heavily into coffee, kind of got addicted to caffeine, but I like coffee. I still like coffee, but I've cut back a bit. One downside to living around Louisville was that I couldn't shoot unless I went out to a dedicated range. It was a hassle to have weapons in your car or, carry them back and forth to your house. Of course, down at campus, was another story. A lot of restrictions. I guess that's the way it is, but it's awfully restrictive, awfully confining. After college, the second time, I went to take a job in Maryland, as I call it, seeking my fortune. I went to Maryland for adventure and just because that was a good job that I found. I got out of school this time just after 9/11, a year after September 11th in 2002. So the economy wasn't all that great. There weren't that many jobs. And so I took one that was at the Army Research Lab. I figured if we were at war. For the job in Maryland, I found a rental that was really unique. It was on about a 30-acre place. It was a loft apartment over a garage, and the homeowner lived in a farmhouse next door across the gravel parking lot. The place had probably a third of a mile gravel driveway through the woods, and then it opened up into a big field where the house and the garage were. It was kind of nice. It was a big enough place that it felt kind of like you were out in the woods. I could shoot my .22 there. It was relatively quiet. That area, that small little town near Belcamp, Maryland, was kind of small, between there and Bel Air. And so there wasn't much traffic. It was easy to get to work. I could ride my bicycle to work sometimes. And so it was great. It was a nice little place. While living in Maryland, I went to a meeting, a church meeting at Baltimore. While working up at Maryland and living there at Belcamp, I went to a Rosary Group meeting at Baltimore. There, I met my wife, or future wife. So we started dating and communicating and visiting each other. It was while living in Maryland that I met my wife at a Rosary Group in Baltimore. While living in Maryland, things changed. I met my future wife at a rosary group at Baltimore. So I used to, at the time she lived near Baltimore, and I used to travel down there to visit her. So I got a good taste of the larger city there. I remember driving to my job from Kentucky. I took all my belongings in a single car in an old Honda Accord, and I drove up there to work. I remember driving through Baltimore at rush hour around the Beltway, and up, I went up 81 and went up through Baltimore and through DC. And I remember thinking, what did I get myself into here? Because it was a real busy traffic time. I was sitting in traffic for a long time, and I thought, gosh, why does anybody live here? What's the draw? I mean, this doesn't seem like a very great place. And so that was one experience with it that I didn't really like. I remember driving in Atlanta once too, and boy, the Beltway around Atlanta I think was wilder than the ones up at Baltimore and DC. Man, those people fly on that road. Turns out that my wife is from it turns out this woman I met, who's to be my wife eventually, is a Southern girl. She's from Mississippi originally, and she and her family live in Tennessee. At the time, she was in Ellicott City near Baltimore, and so we used to visit back and forth. She said that I reminded her of her uncles in Mississippi, and so this Southern drawl got me somewhere in life. While we were dating, Lee got a different job down in Silver Spring, Maryland. So she moved even closer to DC, further from Baltimore, further from where I was living. So I got more travels through Baltimore, then to DC to visit her. So that was even more traffic, more driving, more city. And man, all I wanted to do was visit those places. I knew I didn't want to live there. Home number 22, Belcamp, Maryland. My wife and I were married, and we bought our first house. That house is memorable to me. It was my first one. It was 1,000 square feet, single story with a basement, a walkout basement. It was a nice little house. When we bought it, it had shag carpet about 2.5 inches thick, filled with cat hair. We pulled all that out, and Lee's father taught me how to do hardwood flooring. We put that in the house, finished it. It looked great. It was fun. We renovated the kitchen with some tile, did tile in the bathroom. When we sold the house, we made a bit of money after renovating the house. It was a good experience. It was close to work. I rode my bike to work quite often. Wasn't much traffic there. Nice little town. I enjoyed that house. But later we had our first child, and we were isolated away from family. I have a lot of family in Kentucky. Lee has family in Tennessee. So we decided to move closer to home. We started looking for work around those areas, and I settled on a job near Louisville, Kentucky, back closer to home. Floyd's Knobs, Indiana. All right, home number 23, Floyd's Knobs, Indiana. We sold our house in Belcamp, Maryland, moved to southern Indiana at Floyd's Knobs, just across the river from Louisville. We bought a nice little house, had a little stone on the outside. It was a single-family ranch, single-story ranch with a walkout basement. At the end of the road in a cul-de-sac, nice little neighborhood, low traffic, scenic, lush. It was nice. I love that place. But here's some good advice for young people and those who move around a lot. There again, we bought this house, sold the one in Maryland, so-called bought this house. All this real estate churn costs you in realtor fees if you use realtors, costs you in closing costs at banks, doing loans. If you're going to move a lot, don't do that. Just rent. You'll save a lot of money in the long run. Of course, it's hard to know each time you move. You know, every time we moved, we thought, well, this could be the last house we ever live in. But it didn't work out that way. And I don't think statistically it does. So if I had life to do over again, I would have changed that part of my life as far as the financing. But anyway, that's a sidebar. Okay, we had some good friends there. We had another child or two. There were good hunting opportunities close by, and I got my first couple turkeys there. I remember that. And had a nice easy drive to work down in southern Indiana. Floyd's Knobs was kind of a high spot above the river. We would drive down, down to the near the river level for the job. And so it was a nice place. I really enjoyed that, and I might still be there except for the financial crisis of 2008, 2009. Housing bubble burst, and I lost my job. I was given 5 minutes to get out the door. That's another thing that really sucks about industry. That's a reason things are kind of the way they are now. Understand their economic realities, but companies expect you to give them notice if you're going to quit. If they're going to fire you, they don't give you any notice at all. We got 5 minutes notice to get out. So that made me a little bitter there, can you tell? All right, next stop, number 24, Odin, Indiana. All right, having been laid off from work, I did my own thing for a while, did consulting work. Then I took a 6 months contract job up at Crane, Indiana. And there's actually a military facility up there, and it's a great place to work. And so we had a temporary housing. We lived in a trailer up there on a big farm. The farm was maybe, I'm not sure how many acres it was. Let's say 85 acres. It was fairly good size. They had a big cornfield or soybean field, depending on the season, right behind the house, just right behind the backyard. And there were woods back there. I actually bow hunted and got a deer back there. We could shoot weapons there. We shot our high-powered rifles right straight out the backyard, out into those fields. And I had some visitors come over from work. We fired rifles back there. The farmer lived right next door. He and his family were great. And there was another worker from the military base who lived in another rental house right next door. Those were good days. We traveled back and forth from that rental to our other house in Indiana. And those were good times. We have good memories of that, although we felt a little like gypsies at the time. We were kind of mobile, going back and forth, but that was another good experience, another living place, another experience with the world. All right. Several more homes here coming up. Now we move to Tennessee. A job came up in Tennessee that I couldn't pass up, so I took it and we went to Tennessee. At the time, my wife's parents lived near Johnson City, Tennessee. So we moved down there. Originally, we moved in with them in Jonesboro, Tennessee. Then we bought a condo in Johnson City. We lived in the condo for a while. The experience with the condo was that it was pretty nice, a nice little 2-story condo. We shared a wall with another family. It had a single car garage. It had a flat parking lot. It was up at the top of a hill with a little bit of a view. And it was pretty nice as far as condos go. Of course, it had a homeowners association. and we didn't have to mow the grass. The association mowed the grass and plowed snow if it ever snowed, trimmed the bushes. So it was a different kind of life. Less freedom, but we really weren't there too much. We could play soccer in the side yard. We could throw frisbee in the side yard. It wasn't much of a yard, but for little small kids, it was all right. We could ride tricycles and bicycles up in the flat paved parking lot. But other than that, the kids didn't have a whole lot of room to run around. There were some woods there, and the kids would explore those woods, and but it was all private land, so it was limited what we could do. But it was a nice place overall. Next stop is Chilhowie. All right, number 27 is a place in Johnson City, Tennessee. When my wife moved to Maryland, she owned a home in Johnson City, Tennessee. She left it there and rented it to renters while she went to Maryland. Okay, when we came back there to Tennessee, we still had that rental home. Eventually it became vacant. We sold our condo and we moved into the rental home. There again, that was a financial move and related to careers. That's, the way my parents moved was careers and financial. There again, we moved into that rental to save money. We already owned the house. It was a nice little house. So we moved in, sold our condo, sold our house in Indiana. It was a single-story rancher, no basement, and we had a few small kids. It was a little tight in there. It had a wood stove, had a nice wood stove. Always go back to the wood stove feature. Feels good. There's nothing like wood heat. Anyway, we had a small yard there, fenced-in yard. Our kids could run literally a loop around the house. That was fun for them. We had a dog there, stayed in the backyard. The yard was small, and when we had lots of rain, especially in the winter with freeze-thaw, the yard was always a muddy mess, and the dog ran around in the backyard, and so it was almost not a yard. It was just kind of a muddy patch back in the backyard, so that part wasn't all that pleasant. We redid the deck there. We had redone part of the house before, so we did a few more small renovations, and then eventually sold that house too. But we have good memories in that house, but there again, we have good memories in that house, but there again, we weren't there terribly long. As I said, our house was a little small. We wanted something a little bigger. So there in Johnson City, Tennessee, we found another home that we liked better, moved into that one. It was a larger ranch with a bigger walkout basement, had a nice workshop, garage down in the basement, and bigger yard, a little over an acre yard. So our kids had more room to run outside, play kickball and throw frisbee. It was a small town neighborhood. It was low traffic, and it was near church. We could walk to church. And one of my sons and daughter, also one of my daughters, went to the local Catholic school there for a while. And we liked it. We liked the neighborhood. We liked the house. Really loved the house. And did a few renovations also in that house with flooring and paint, and put a huge deck on the back that would probably hold the house up in case of a hurricane. It was a huge covered deck with thick beams, I really overdid that one. But it was a great place, nice deck. And we loved it, we liked it. When we moved to Tennessee, Lee's family was there. Several of her brothers were there, and we had some family there. Over time, her brothers graduated from school, left town for jobs, other opportunities. We were left there with her parents only. Yet back in Kentucky, I had hundreds of relatives. So we kind of decided eventually, let's go more near our family. Eventually, also, we brought Lee's mother and dad to Kentucky near us to help take care of them as they aged. So that worked out well. We eventually moved back to Kentucky for more of the story. All right, number 29, Kentucky. All right, we moved to Georgetown, Kentucky. I took a job back in Kentucky to get closer to family. We moved out of Tennessee back to Kentucky into a rental in Georgetown, Kentucky. It was a nice house, a big rancher, no basement, but it had a nice garage. It was plenty large enough for us. Nice little neighborhood, quiet, older, established neighborhood, had big trees, and we liked that house. But, you know, the yard was third acre or something like that, not a lot of room for the kids. We could go to local parks and go out to wildlife management areas and things like that to be out in the woods or be out in nature. Other than that, it was city living. Sidewalks, roads, a little bit of traffic, not too bad. Kind of boring. No shooting. Couldn't even shoot bows in the yard. It was so tight around there in that neighborhood. So we liked it overall, but it was a little small, a little confining. And for the first time, I started to really get the inclination of buying land. I was to the point where we could more easily afford it. I'd been working for a good while, and so we started looking very hard for land. Though it was expensive, we finally found one that was in our price range and it offered what we wanted. Okay, number 30, where we live now, Stamping Ground, Kentucky. Okay, Stamping Ground is a small place between Georgetown and Frankfort in Kentucky, northwest of Lexington, Kentucky. So it's a nice place. It's off the beaten path somewhat, but we're still close enough to grocery stores and Walmarts and convenience stores and gas stations, places where we can, get civilization. But we're out on 50 acres, and we're so thankful to find it at a price we could buy it. And it was before COVID, before the prices shot up out of sight. When we bought this place, it had been somewhat abandoned for about 2 years. First time we looked at it, I didn't even like it. Driveway was in bad shape. It was steep. Grass was about over a foot tall in the yard. Weeds 8-10 feet high in the fields. There was a horse living here that just roamed free and with no care at all. The place was kind of abandoned. It looked kind of rough. But I remember walking out there with my kids once out in the field, literally parting 10-foot high weeds, walking through the field. And I stopped and I said, "Kids, listen, what do you hear?" And one of the kids said, "Daddy, I don't hear anything." So that's the point. You don't hear anything. So that's one thing I like about it. It's far enough away. We don't have a lot of traffic noise. But it's only a couple miles off one of the thoroughfare roads. So it's easy to get over to where we need to go. It's got 20 acres of fields, 30 acres of woods. We've got a lot of trails through the woods where the previous owners had horses. And so we kept those trails open, and we opened a few more of our own trails. And we enjoy walking and running on those trails, riding our mountain bikes on the trails. We have a few animals. We've just gotten into cutting hay and trying to make our own hay so that we don't have to depend on others to do it for us. There'll be a separate video on that process. We refurbished an old 1950s square baler, and we're doing cutting hay on a budget, super budget. As I said, this property was kind of abandoned. We looked at it a year before we actually bought it. But the first time we looked at it, the price was too high. First time we looked at it, the price was too high. I didn't really like it that much. And we were looking at other properties that I liked better. We wound up not getting those, mainly because of the prices. And then one day my wife looked at the internet and saw that the price on this place had dropped. So we went and looked again, and it was still in similar condition. Still, you know, they probably bush hogged the yard every 3 months. It looked pretty rough, and the old farmhouse needed some work. And so we lobbed in a lowball offer. It was so pitifully low, we wondered if we would be put in jail because it was so offensive. But to our surprise, the owners countered with an offer that was even less than they were asking. And so we negotiated to a price that was still kind of a stretch for us to pay, but it was much lower than they had originally asked for the place. There was also drama involved in actually getting it, because there was another buyer who was actually under contract to buy the place, so we were second in line. But thankfully, those people went to the closing table and failed to close the deal. They didn't come up with the money, apparently. And so we wound up getting the place. We feel like it was meant to be. This was the place we were supposed to be, so we got it. We're very thankful to have it. We look at the prices of real estate now in this area. It's a fast growing area. Prices have shot up. COVID made it worse with the price of raw land. And there's no possible way we could afford to buy this now in today's prices. So we couldn't foresee COVID coming, but we were so glad to get in just before that happened. During COVID, this was a real restful place. It was great to have it. It probably saved our sanity, because we were able to run around and roam here outside. Of course, we weren't wearing masks. We didn't wear masks a lot of the time that we were supposed to anyway. Of course, you were not supposed to get together during COVID. We had big outdoor parties here. You know, we were all 6 feet away from each other. It was very safe. It was kind of humorous. We may have had 50 cars parked here in the yard that you could easily see from the road during times that we weren't supposed to be having get-togethers. But we have a 50 by 30 pole barn here that opens at each end. And so we considered that an outdoor venue, kind of like a pavilion or something. We had potlucks here. Maybe we weren't supposed to, but it saved everyone's sanity.